Okay, take it away, Francis.
Well, hello, friends. Welcome to this 18th webinar on the secret teachings of all ages by Manly P. Hall. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. Previous episodes of this and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald Secret Teachings or Secret Doctrine. Okay, last month we continued our study of the Lesser and Greater Greek Mysteries at Eleusis, the Eleusinian Mysteries, including an analysis of J.A. Knapp's painting, shown on the left, entitled An Initiation Ceremony in the Eleusinian Mysteries, which depicts the underworld overseen by Pluto. These mysteries, you may remember, are centered around Persephone, whose captivity is a metaphor for our own incarnation, our own captivity in the three worlds of human endeavor. So let's pick up where we left off in the middle of this second paragraph, starting with, as the degree dealt. And could we get a reader, please?
Yes, I think I recognize most of those words. Let me do it. As the degree dealt largely with the miseries of those who failed to make the best use of their philosophic opportunities, the chambers of initiation were subterranean, and the horrors of Hades were vividly depicted in a complicated ritualistic drama. After passing successfully through the tortuous passageways with their trials and dangers, the candidate received the honorary title of Mystes. This meant one who saw through a veil or had a clouded vision. It also signified that the candidate had been brought up to the veil, which would be torn away in the higher degree. The modern word mystic, as referring to a seeker after truth according to the dictates of the heart along the path of faith, is probably derived from this ancient word, for faith is belief in the reality of things unseen or veiled.
Thanks, Bill. So you may have noticed certain common threads woven through all the mystery schools we've studied so far. One of these, featured without exception in all these schools, was the use of subterranean chambers. Here's an example of this usage. And could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes, Martha G., can you read that for us, please?
Yes. While in the city of Ephesus, Julian formally renounced his Christian baptism and was initiated into the cult of the Mother of the Gods in subterranean chambers beneath the Temple of Hecate, which is one of the vast complex of buildings composing the sanctuary of Diana. According to Madame Blavatsky, the ritual used on the occasion was Mithraic, and it should be remembered that Neoplatonism had already permeated all of these systems and embraced their secret rituals. She writes, when Maxime, the Ephesian, initiated the Emperor Julian into the Mithraic mysteries, he pronounced as the usual formula of the rite the following: by this blood I wash thee from thy sins. The word of the highest has entered unto thee, and his spirit henceforth will rest upon, what happened?
I can finish it for you. Do you have your, that Zoom thing jumping up in front of the, yeah.
I do, I know there's a rule that get that.
Anyway, it says, his spirit henceforth will rest upon the newly born, the new begotten of the highest God. Thou art the son of Mithra. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
So, but, you know, we could ask, why why a subterranean chamber or cave, or in the case of the Druids and some other schools, the deepest part of a grove of trees? Why did they use this? And we have an answer here. Could we get a reader for this?
Yes. And Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm on the road. I'll be about 20 minutes at home. So can I read then, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, best not to take your eyes off the road to read.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And we'll plug
All
that
right.
into you. We actually have some Greek for you to read, so that'll be invaluable.
I would
Thank
love
you.
to. I would love to.
Okay.
Lynn, can you read it for us then, please?
Yes, such an underground chamber is referred to in the old mysteries as the Grotto of Dionysus. The subterranean chamber is indicative of locked, hidden meaning, anything that is obscure, anything that cannot be easily discovered. For example, we are told by the Kabbalists that certain secrets, certain mysteries are concealed in caves. The caves are words, hiding places for meanings. So an old story of the Old Testament represents light hidden in darkness, ideas in words, spirit in matter. The words obscure the meaning, but the words are yet like the walls of the cave, which protect the meaning while they obscure it.
So the idea then is that the cave represents the state of consciousness of those who are going through the process, right? The acolytes. And then as they come into the light, it's that again mirrors their evolvement and understanding. Any thoughts or questions or comments about this idea? Albert Pike expands on that stage of acolyte, this early stage of the acolyte called mystes in the Greek system. Can we get a reader for this? This, please, from Morals and Dogma.
Okay. Karen, can you read that for us, please?
There was a distinction between the lesser and greater mysteries. One must have been for some years admitted to the former before he could receive the latter, which were but a preparation for them, the vestibule of the temple, of which those of Eleusis were the sanctuary. There in the lesser mysteries, they were prepared to receive the holy truths taught in the greater. The initiates in the lesser were called simply mystes or initiates, but those in the greater epoptes or seers. An ancient poet says that the former were an imperfect shadow of the latter, as sleep is of death. After admission to the former, the initiate was taught lessons of morality and the rudiments of the sacred science, the most sublime and secret part of which was reserved for the epopt, who saw the truth in its nakedness, while the mystes only viewed it through a veil and under the emblem and under emblems fitter. Yeah, I'm losing the words. Under emblems fitter to excite than to satisfy his curiosity.
Well, it's an unusual use of the word right there. But I think, yeah, thanks, Karen. Any thoughts or questions about Albert Pike's writings here? So we move from mystes to epopt, from the veiled to the seer, right? As though the veil is pulled back. The former, as described by this poet, an imperfect shadow of the latter, as sleep is of death. It's interesting. Okay, next up.
Hey, you're right in the way.
Oh, yes, somebody?
It's Karen. I'm going to mute you.
Okay, go ahead. Can we get a reader, please, for this?
Okay, Joe, can you read that, please?
Yes. The greater mysteries, into which the candidate was admitted only after he had successfully passed through the ordeals of the lesser, and not always then, were sacred to Ceres, the mother of Persephone, and represent her as wandering through the world in quest of her abducted daughter. Ceres carried two torches, intuition and reason, to aid her in the search for her lost child, the soul. At last, she found Persephone not far from Eleusis, and out of gratitude taught the people there to cultivate corn, which is sacred to her. She also founded the mysteries. Ceres appeared before Pluto, god of the souls of the dead, and pleaded with him to allow Persephone to return to her home. This the god at first refused to do because Persephone had eaten of the pomegranate, the fruit of mortality. At last, however, he compromised and agreed to permit Persephone to live in the upper world half of the year if she would stay with him in the darkness of Hades for the remaining half.
Thank you, Joe. Any thoughts or questions about this? For further insight?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Scott's got his hand up, so go ahead, Scott.
Okay. I've seen this amount of time Persephone was above and below. Sometimes as a half, more often I think as a third for one season, 4 months. What do you think?
I've seen it also as 3/4, a quarter and 3/4, because you have the 9 and the 3. Right. Yeah, I don't know what to make of the 4 and the 8 idea.
Or 3 and 9, just not 6 and 6 is different.
Right. Yeah, well, of course, with 3 and 9, you have the idea of gestation, which is often used in the 9 of the whole process of making your way through the 9 worlds, as they're often called. They were called that, for instance, in the Norse mythology. You make your way up through the 9 worlds. And we were just reading about that in Secret Doctrine too, this idea. Connected with manifestation in general, 9-ness, and it's also the 9 initiations, which finally and ultimately frees you from matter altogether, So there's that idea. I think it's more esoteric than the 6 and 6.
So it works. Since they had one mysteries was in like February and one was in October, right? Different ends of the season.
September, yeah. September. Yeah, late September. I think it's connected with that equinox, that equinox.
And the 3 months being the summer, that is barren.
Really?
Or after the harvest, there's a deal there with the 3.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure of that association. After the harvest.
Because this is related so much to grain with Ceres. Corn, yes, but grain in particular, right?
Yeah, very much. Ceres is, the root for cereal, and you have that in both of these goddesses. Persephone is also described as it's the seed that is turned into the earth. It's the fire in the earth, that idea. And the fact that from that fire is new birth, and and then you have the metaphor, of course, that we grow from the material into spirit, just as Persephone's seeds grow into the light of day, So that's all connected. And we'll be getting into those metaphors as we come along.
Francis?
Yeah.
Yvonne asks, why is pomegranate food of mortality?
I didn't research that. And I know that it's very much connected with the feminine, and just exoterically, not to put too fine a point on this, but if you cut a pomegranate in half, it has a very feminine look to it. Beyond that, I don't know specifically. It's a good question. I actually wish I'd looked it up for you guys, but I see Christine Morris has raised her hand. Maybe she has the answer.
Go ahead, Christine. You can unmute yourself now.
Okay. This morning I pulled the High Priestess card, and it lists the fact that behind her were palms and pomegranates.
Yep.
That really relate to the fact of male and female.
Yeah.
So
yep.
Even though, you know, we're discussing her abilities, she also takes on the balance, because that card is about being in balance.
Yeah, which is itself feminine in its aspect. Yeah, that second card, you know, is, and I remember that now, and I can picture it in my mind that there's a pomegranate shown, you know, which would be then a symbol, one of her symbols, right? And it's the symbol that card has a lot to do with the law of nature, right? You have, I think she's holding the a scroll that has Rhoda or Tarot written on it, you know, which is the same thing.
Well, she's wearing the equilateral cross as well.
That's right. Yeah, it's all symbols for this place of equality, standing between the two pillars, the white and black pillar, Joachim and Boaz, and which is another place, you know, between the two, not the polarity of, you know, of the third card, you know, which is it not the princess, what is it? Oh, come on.
I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, anyway, it goes into the feminine, the empress, that's what it is.
Oh yeah, the empress, yeah.
Moves as you go from 2 to 3. So the 2, which you normally think of as a feminine card, in this case, is a card of balance in a sense between the masculine 1 and the feminine 3, or the 3 and the 4, which again turns to masculine with the emperor. But anyway, we won't go too far down that rabbit hole. But thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it is a sign of that place in consciousness, the pomegranate. So, yeah, the fruit of mortality. Yeah, I'd like to look that up, but thanks for that. Okay, anyone else? Okay, let's see, where in the heck are we? Are we to a new reading here? Oh, no, not yet. Okay, so for further insight into this sentence, Ceres carries 2 torches, intuition and reason, to aid her in the search for her lost child, the soul. We turn to Thomas Taylor. And could we get a reader for these 2 sections, please? Actually, 2 readers.
Scott, can you read, please? Can you start and then I'll finish.
Where do you want me to stop?
At the end of the slide, don't worry.
Okay. But Ceres, upon discovering the loss of her daughter, with lighted torches and begirt with a serpent, wandered over the whole earth for the purpose of finding her, till she came to Eleusis. There she found her daughter, and also taught to the Eleusinians the cultivation of corn. Now, in this fable, Ceres represents the evolution of that intuitional part of our nature, which we properly denominate intellect, or the unfolding of the intuitional faculty of the mind from its quiet and collected condition in the world of thought. And Proserpina, that living, self-moving, and animating part, which we call soul. According to the philosopher Sallust, Ceres is among the mundane divinities, the deity of the planet Saturn. So that In consequence of this, our intellect or intuitive faculty in a descending state must aptly symbolize, identify with the divinity of Ceres. But Pluto signifies the whole of a material nature. Since the empire of this god, according to Pythagoras, commences downward from the galaxy or Milky Way. And the cavern signifies the entrance, as it were, into the profundities of such a nature, which is accomplished by the soul's union, represented by Proserpina's marriage with this terrestrial body. But the design of Proserpina in venturing from her retreat is beautifully significant of her approaching descent, for she rambles from home for the purpose of gathering flowers, and this in a lawn replete with the most enchanting variety and exhaling the most delicious odors. This is a manifested image of the soul, operating principally according to the natural and external life, and so becoming effeminated and ensnared through the delusive attractions of sensible form.
Thanks, Scott. Actually, before we move on, do you have any thoughts or questions about this? This is a quite esoteric passage here.
Who is this by?
This is the, it's King, C.W. King, Eleusinian and Bacchic. Oh no, this is Taylor.
Thomas Taylor, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's no big surprise.
It mashes together intellect and intuition in ways that
we normally don't. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's, yeah, this Ceres's identity here is not lower mind intellect, you know, but that
higher mind.
Higher mind, intuitive faculty in a descending state, which is interesting because it qualifies it in that way. What?
So I say it still leaves it on the mental plane and not the Buddhic.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah, yeah. And it's distinct from Pluto, which is the entire material nature, you know, which I think, and he's often, you know, Pluto is manas, and over, you know, that idea of the lower mind overseeing the underworld, which is, you know, the threefold human endeavor, as distinct from this quality of the higher intellect or intuitive faculty of higher mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to this. We'll finish out.
Okay, my turn.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. But what emblem can more beautifully represent the evolutions and outgoings of an intellectual nature into the regions of sense than the wanderings of Ceres by the light of torches through the darkness of night, and continuing the pursuit until she proceeds into the depths of Hades itself. For the intellectual part of the soul, you want me to read that?
No, go ahead, finish the sentence.
Okay. When it verges towards body, enkindles indeed a light in its dark receptacle, but becomes itself situated in obscurity. And, as Proclus somewhere divinely observes, the mortal nature by this means participates of the divine intellect, but the intellectual part is drawn down to earth.
To death.
Oh, sorry, to death.
Same thing. Go ahead, read the...
Okay. The soul is a composite nature, is on one side linked to the eternal world, its essence being generated of that ineffable element which constitutes the real, the immutable, and the permanent. It is a beam of the eternal sun, a spark of the divinity, an emanation from God. On the other hand, it is linked to the phenomenal or sensible world, its emotive part being formed of that which is relative and phenomenal. I love that.
Yeah, you gotta love Thomas Taylor. He's, he was really some kind, the first theosophist. He wrote in the late 18th century and the early 19th. And it's, so clearly was, had enlightened understanding and perspective, it's, and it's just terrific that he wrote about this material because it gives us an insight, I was just this first sentence, what emblem can more beautifully represent the evolutions and outgoings of an intellectual nature into the regions of sense than the wanderings of Sirius by light of two torches through the darkness of night? It's just, he just brings it into real understanding. And all these, the reason I'm using this particular series of illustrations because they occur in his book, Eleusinian and Bacchic Mysteries, So you can see here a kind of it's almost like the caduceus in another form, right? So you have a mercurial winged Mercury carrying Cirrus, or there's certainly a connection here. And then Pluto over here, focused on the waters of the material nature. It's just very interesting. So any thoughts or questions about either of these? These passages represent definitely a more esoteric understanding. Yeah, Scott, before we go ahead.
Is this perhaps a depiction of Ceres going before Pluto asking for her daughter's release and he turning away, says no?
Oh yeah, I like that.
And she leaves then in the chariot back into the world.
It could be. This certainly the first part of your statement. I like, the fact that he's definitely turning away from her.
It's an ongoing tableau where they show motion through different images.
Yeah.
Series.
Right, exactly. It could be. So what you're saying then is that this could also be Ceres, and he's turning away from her. And some attendees here in attendance, not attendees, definitely different. And then here you have a different tableau. I like that. And I think that would bring further understanding. It's really hard to unravel the entire tableau. If anybody has any insight, it'd be great to hear about it. Yeah, good. Also you have this lion-like creature here at the center of these two serpents, these yoked serpents, or dragons. It suggests that solar nature, solar chariot going into this. Here's one of the torches she's carrying. Yeah, any other thoughts about this before we move on? Okay. So these are esoteric, but to the uninitiated masses in ancient Greece, because these mystery schools were incredibly popular and appealed to all levels. If you remember from last time, I think we talked about how there were women and children in all levels of consciousness that got involved in these mysteries. And so for the uninitiated, we had a completely different understanding of Ceres, which is, as I mentioned before, the word cereal is derived. And she was simply the goddess of plenty for, normal households, right? So let's read about two public, rather than, behind the closed doors of the mysteries, two public festivals that honored this goddess, festivals that continue for centuries, literally after the Eleusinian Mysteries had fallen into eclipse. Let's divide this down the middle. We'll have a reader for the first quote and then one for the second.
Okay, first, Scott's got his hand up.
Okay.
Did you want to say something again, Scott, or is that from before?
That's from before, my mistake.
Okay. You can either, there you go. All right. Carrie, can you start reading for us? And then Olivia, I'll ask you next, okay?
So down to Terry, down to the Golden Bough.
All right. Here again, the fertilizing power of the corn mother is indicated. In France also, in the neighborhood of Auxerre, the last chief goes by the name of the mother of the wheat, mother of the barley, mother of the rye, or mother of the oats. It is left standing in the field till the last wagon is about to wend homewards. Then a puppet is made out of it, dressed with clothes belonging to the farmer, and adorned with a crown and a blue or white scarf. A branch of a tree is stuck in the breast of the puppet, which is now called the Ceres. At the dance in the evening, the Ceres is placed in the middle of the floor, and the reaper who reaped fastest dances round it with the prettiest girl for his partner. After the dance, a pyre is made. All the girls, each wearing a sheath, strip the puppet, pull it to pieces, and place it on the pyre, along with the flowers with which it was adorned. Then the girl who was the first to finish reaping sets fire to the pile, and all pray that Ceres may give a fruitful year.
Thank you, Carrie. So, you know, this could be done with no awareness of the more esoteric implications of Ceres. It's just a festival that was carried on, but it's definitely has its roots in those esoteric implications. Okay, for the next part, please, Olivia.
Olivia, please.
A remnant of the Eleusinian Mysteries of Ceres is still retained in the festival of St. Agatha in Sicily. The same horse races are continued, the same processions made by friendly societies, the sodalities of antiquity, in which the image of the saint on a triumphal car and the sacred relics are borne about with wax lights of an enormous size, precisely as it was usual in the processions in honor of Ceres. The processions take place on the fourth day of the festival of the saint, as it did on the fourth day of the festival of Ceres. At the conclusion of the festival, in each case, the sacred relics, which were only shown on those occasions, were offered to the people to kiss. And finally, as the Eleusinian Mysteries were celebrated twice a year, in spring and in autumn, so are the festivals of St. Agatha.
Thank you, Olivia. So we see here, and this is, you run into this more you study all the time, where extant festivals, processions, observances were just taken and whole cloth adopted by the Christian faith. You know, when we get into Orpheus, you'll see so many, and we have before in other of the mystery schools, where so many of the aspects of the mystery schools of the European sage were adopted by Christianity, right? Okay, moving on. Next up, can we get a read for this short paragraph?
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please? There you go. You're self-muted, I think.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The Greeks believed that Persephone was a manifestation of the solar energy, which in the winter months lived under the earth with Pluto, but in the summer returned again with the goddess of productiveness. There is a legend that the flowers loved Persephone, and that every year when she left for the dark realms of Pluto, the plants and shrubs would die of grief. I love that. The profane and uninitiated had their own opinions on these subjects. The truths of the Greek allegories remained safely concealed by the priests, who alone recognized the sublimity of these great philosophic and religious parables. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. This is the whole purpose of creating a mythology, is that it allows them to be progressively unfolded based on the consciousness of the student, right? So the seasonal implications of Persephone's cyclic descent to Hades are obvious, right, as stated here. But esoterically, Persephone personifies our cyclic incarnations on Earth, thus embedding the solar principle in the Hades of our fleshly garb. In this way, as stated earlier, she is the fire that pervades the earth, which is both the cause and effect of fertility and destruction, of incarnation and physical death. So next up.
Okay, and Veronica. There you go. Oh, you're not.
Can you hear me?
Are you off the road?
Yes, I'm off the road now.
Okay.
Just as the lesser mysteries discuss the parental epoch of man, when the consciousness in its 9 days, embryologically months, was descending into the realm of illusion and assuming the veil of unreality, so the greater mysteries discuss the principles of spiritual regeneration and reveal to initiates not only the simplest, but also the most direct and complete method of liberating their higher natures from the bondage of material ignorance. Like Prometheus chained to the top of Mount Caucasus, man's higher nature is chained to his inadequate personality. The 9 days of initiation was also symbolic of the 9 spheres through which the human soul descends during the process of assuming a terrestrial form. The secret exercises for spiritual unfoldment given to the disciples of the higher degrees are unknown, but there is every reason to believe that they were similar to the Brahmic mysteries, since it was known that the Eleusinian ceremonies were closed with the Sanskrit word Nox Om Pax.
Thank you. So any thoughts or questions about this? The quote, prenatal epoch of man refers to humanity's evolutionary arc, which lasted halfway through the 4th globe of the 4th round. That halfway point was in turn marked by the 4th Atlantean root race. You see, this represents the round, this represents the globes. That halfway point, the failure of that race, the Atlantean, which we'll study in the chapter on Atlantis coming up in a couple of webinars, marked the lowest point of humanity's evolutional arc. Symbolically, the lesser mysteries are concerned with this descent into the form aspect, just as the greater mysteries are oriented to the evolutional arc. So it's fitting that in Eleusis, which is, beyond that halfway point from Atlantis, but definitely informed by those mysteries, has both schools in place. We'll be considering the number 9 in greater depth in the next Secret Doctrine webinar. We briefly considered the 9 days in the greater Eleusinian rites as described here. But for now, let's take a closer look at the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th days of the rites, again described by Thomas Taylor in his Eleusinian and Bacchic Mysteries. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Michael, can you read that for us, please?
Me?
Yes, please.
That's starting from the 6th, right?
Correct.
Hold on a sec. The 6th was a great occasion. The statue of Aeacus, the son of Zeus and Demeter, was brought from Athens by the Iacchoroi, all crowned with myrtle. In the way was heard only an uproar of singing and the beating of brazen kettles as the votaries danced and ran along. The image was borne through the sacred gate along the sacred way, halting by the sacred fig tree. All sacred, mark you, from Eleusinian associations, where the procession rests and then moves on to the bridge over Cephissus, where again it rests, and where the expression of the wildest grief gives place to the trifling farce, even as Demeter, in the midst of her grief, smiled at the levity of Iambe in the palace of Celeus. Through the mystical entrance we enter Eleusis. On the 7th day, games are celebrated, and to the victor is given a measure of barley, as it were a gift direct from the hand of the goddess. The 8th is sacred to Aesculapius.
Aesculapius, yeah.
Aesculapius, the divine physician who heals all diseases, and in the evening is performed the initiatory ritual.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Any thoughts or questions about this? You can see a kind of composite image here. You know, here's the sacrificial ritual. You know, here's the statue of Iacchus. I get a little insight into the feeling of how these processions, you know, unfolded. Okay. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Christine, can you read that for us, please?
Hang on.
There you go.
That part of the allegory referring to the 2 6-month periods during which one of Persephone must remain with Pluto, while during the other she may revisit the upper world, offering material for deep consideration. It is probable that the Eleusinians realized that the soul left the body during sleep, or at least it was made capable of leaving by special training, which undoubtedly they were in a position to give. Is somebody talking to me?
No, go ahead.
Thus, Persephone would remain as the queen of Pluto's realm during the waking hours, but would ascend.
Oops.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
No, go ahead. But would ascend.
Now I lost my place. But would ascend to the spiritual world during periods of sleep. The initiate was taught how to intercede with Pluto to permit Persephone, the initiate's soul, now that's new, to ascend from the darkness of his material nature to the light of understanding. When thus freed from the shackles of clay and crystallized concepts, the initiate was liberated not only for the period of his life, but for all eternity. For never thereafter was he divested of those soul qualities which after death were his vehicles for manifestation and expression in the so-called heaven world.
Okay.
So,
yeah, so now you have to understand that the nature of soul among the Greeks was a little different than the decay, than, you know, the modern theosophy. This is the soul as represented by Persephone is this soul within the imprisoning cube of matter, right? But it is, you know, you could say that it is that light of awareness in our own consciousness, or in the, you know, the acolyte or the disciple's consciousness, as he's attempting to free him or herself from the darkness of materiality, right? Rather than the soul on its own plane.
I'm having a problem. I see multidimensional soul.
It's this, yes, well, this is one of the great problems. I think ultimately it's a secret of initiation, how the soul can be free on its own plane and yet embedded in the fleshly world. You can, one way to understand this is that it's the level of understanding, you know, gosh, I have to back up even a little more, that, you know, from that point of individualization, the soul acquiesces to the form aspect to guide this new singular human being through the, you know, the realm of materiality over a period of thousands of lifetimes, right? At some point, there's a response to that acquiescence. That's sometimes called the second acquiescence, where this, and that one's done by the indwelling soul, you know. In other words, that part within us that responds to that soul on its own plane, but it's really, in fact, the same being. It's, you know, it's a conundrum wrapped within an enigma or something like that.
Can I divert a bit? I was exploring this with somebody, and I was, not this in particular, but at some point in the past, that we leave part of us up there someplace when we come here. In other words, and I don't know whether I should say in reference to parallel lives, I'm not sure that's what we were talking about, but in that kind of a context.
Yeah, that part of us is our actual true self. You know, we break off in awareness, not in truth.
Oh, in awareness.
Yeah, we lose the awareness of our true self, at least up until the third initiation, in order to descend into matter and to gain experience, right? And then through that experience, we eventually come into awareness of the soul while in the physical realm. And the purpose of that is so that we can shed light on in this place. You know, the disciple who has become soul infused in this place is able to actually carry that light, the light of the true soul on its own plane out into this world. I hope that helps a little bit. It is a complex subject.
Thank you. I'll work on it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we all are. Okay. Okay, let's see.
Francis?
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, Anne Veronica typed a comment here. She says, I was thinking about the number 8 for us. August, the 8th month, is called the one that feeds the other 11.
Okay. Is that in reference to the comment that Scott made about the 4 and the 8 divisions?
Let me.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
you were talking about the 4 and the 8. For us, the 8th month, it's the richest month of the year, And we have a saying that it feeds the rest of the 11 months.
That's
August.
interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
So if I remember well, at the end of the August were all these rituals, weren't they?
Yeah, there were, right, we could go back there, but I believe it was, yeah. And, you know, you have this Leo connection with Virgo, you know, at one point they were the same sign, and that's the 8th and the 9th, which is, you know, very much connected with this Persephone ritual, you know, that the original mother of the world idea in both Ceres and Persephone. So yeah, I think you get a definite linking in that way. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, HPB sheds light on the, quote, allegory of the 2 6-month periods in Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge. Could we get a reader? And this is all about the whole nature of these two divisions, whether they're 6 months or 3 and 9 or 4 and 8, the idea. But here it definitely references the 6 and 6 in a different context, but it's relevant. Can we get a reader for this?
Tia, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. There is a passage in the Bhagavad Gita wherein Krishna, speaking symbolically and esoterically, says, I will state the times, conditions at which devotees departing from this life do so never to return, be reborn, or to return to incarnate again. The fire, the flame, the day, the bright lucky fortnight, the 6 months of the northern solstice, departing, dying in these. Those who know the Brahman, yogis, go to the Brahman. Smoke, night, the dark, unlucky fortnight, the 6 months of the southern solstice, dying in these. The devotee goes into the lunar light, or the mansion, the astral light also, and returns, is reborn.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt real quick. Starting here with I will state the times. This is all Krishna's voice down to where you stopped. And so go ahead.
What is the explanation of this passage? It means that the devotees are divided into 2 classes. Those who reach nirvana on earth and either accept or refuse it, they'll never to be reborn again in this Mahakalpa, or age of Rama. And those who do not reach this state of bliss as Buddha and others did. The fire, the flame, the day, the bright fortnight of the moon are all symbols of the highest absolute deity. Those who die in such a state of absolute purity go to Brahman. In other words, have a right to the moksha or nirvana. On the other hand, smoke, night, the dark fortnight, etc., are all symbolical of matter, the darkness of ignorance. Those who die in such a state of incomplete purification must of course be reborn. Only the homogeneous, the absolutely purified, unalloyed spirit can be reunited to the deity or go to Brahma.
Thank you. Okay, so obviously, you know, everybody who dies during the bright half of the year, which is what's being described here, isn't free from the chains of samsara, you know, as well as, you know, those who die in all the elements that represent the shadow side, that, you know, the waning moon, etc., are not, you know, well, you know, there's a lot more that will be reborn, but it's a allegorical condition, not a literal statement, you know. So, you know, this is probably one of the most contentious verses within the Bhagavad Gita. People talk about this all the time. You know, how could it be literally true, you know, that if you have a saint who dies during the waning moon, or, you know, a very average person who happens to die, you know, in a at a time when during the bright forenight of the moon, for instance, that this would somehow be determinative, and it is of course not. It's an allegory for their conditioned state of consciousness. But does anybody have any thoughts or questions, or maybe you have some more understanding of this? It's often talked about. In fact, DK just describes a similar division, but with a different usage of the division. Could we get a reader for these two quotes? First one's from Treatise on White Magic, the second one from Letters on Occult Meditation.
Martha G., can you read that for us, please?
Yes. The path of the sun in the heavens, quote, the southern path tends to a lowered vibratory influence, and aspirants should bear this in mind in autumn and the early winter months, from the Treatise on White Magic. And the other one, in exactly the same way, his studies each month will be so arranged that the harder part, dealing with the higher mind, will be undertaken during the part of the month which is called the bright half, whilst the work of the dark half will be more given over to the things concerning lower mind and to an effort to hold the gain of earlier weeks. Letters on the Occult
Meditation. Thank you, Martha. So any thoughts or questions about this whole concept?
Isn't that true?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Martha.
I'm sorry, Bio. And isn't this the way the zodiac is kind of looked at, that there's the lower half and the upper half, and they signify certain levels, but sort of a male, female assumption about things?
Well, I don't know about the zodiac in particular. In terms of how it relates to the dark and light half of the years, it certainly does. You know, starting with the winter solstice, where the sun turns northward, until the summer solstice is all considered the light half of the year, and would definitely be the major division of these two. And of course, that includes half the signs. So in that sense, yes, right. But, you know, you wouldn't consider, you know, for instance, Leo or any of the signs in the dark half of the year as being, you know, afflicted by this particular shadow. In fact, Leo is the sign of the sun itself. So, yeah, it's more having to do with the entire half of the year. And, you know, and he affirms that here. There's some connection between this and this previous words from Krishna about cycles of time, of light and shadow. I know, for instance, I'll just finish this statement, which is that, you know, these cycles are very important, you know, for instance, and are taken into account in terms of the time that initiations are performed. You know, sometimes a disciple will have to wait until the following life, even though they may be ready to take an initiation, in order to that they align with the cycles most propitiously. Yeah, go ahead. Who was speaking?
Well, I was just, this is Martha G. I was just wondering if the process of the thinking and the pursuit is really what is interesting, because in some ways they were observers of the way the cycles worked. And, you know, even the body, the human body, they didn't know about vitamin D, and the vitamin D goes down when the sun is not as available. And so, you know, lots of us are having to take vitamin D to complement that. But they were, so there's, it's not so much the content of what is said, but the depth of the questioning, the observing itself, that I think is where the meaning lies.
Yeah, and I think that's also very much wrapped up in this idea of Persephone and her, 6 months in the lower realm, which has so many layers that it can be, um, uh, that it can pertain to, right? The time in the light and the time in the shadow. Yeah, somebody?
Well, Yvonne's got her hand up, but Anne Veronica says the law of cycles.
Exactly, indeed. Right, that's what's being described here. Yeah, and whoever had their hand.
Yvonne, go ahead.
Okay, I think anyone in the Moria Federation will recognize this.
Yeah, exactly.
Once of the year when you do your homework, and then the dark half of the year when you hope you've retained enough to hold the gain of the earlier weeks, and you have the dark half of the year and you write your papers.
That's exactly right.
Example of how Moria Federation is set up.
Exactly, and it was set up that way, due in part to these two quotes that appear on the page right here, right? And he also, he goes into it further in the 7th letter of Letters on Occult Meditation, where he describes the schools, and more specifically, because the Moria Federation basically patterns itself after the esoteric schools that will come into play later in the Aquarian age. Yeah, thanks for that note. Anyone else before we move on?
Yeah, Francis, I just wanted to say that I also believe that's the way that DK asked his disciples in the Dyna books to work. He gave them all assignments. They had homework to do, just like we do, and they had papers that they were supposed to write. And I believe he adhered to this same schedule like we do with the Moira Federation, and that's one of the things we patterned it on.
Indeed. Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. Okay, next. MPH gives us a clear statement as to the essential purpose of the Eleusinian as well as all mystery schools when he says, the initiate was taught how to intercede with Pluto to permit Persephone, the initiate's soul, to ascend from the darkness of his material nature into the light of understanding. The important part here is the intercession. When thus freed from the shackles of clay and crystallized concepts, the initiate was liberated not only for the period of his life, but for all eternity. This is the stage of the epopt, which was described earlier. Remember, you move from the mystis to the epopt, or the seer, which Albert Pike described as, quote, regenerated, newborn, restored to a renovated existence of life, light, and purity, and placed under the divine protection. Thomas Taylor expands on the journey of the Eleusinian candidate. Can we get a reader for this and note the marvelous painting on the left? It's by Jofra.
Okay, Scott, can you read that for us, please?
The greater mysteries completed the work. The candidate was more fully instructed and disciplined, becoming an impopta, or seer. He was now regarded as having received the arcane principles of life. This was also the end sought by philosophy. The soul was believed to be of composite nature, linked on the one side to the eternal world emanating from God, and so partaking of divinity. On the other hand, it was also allied to the phenomenal or external world, and so liable to be subjected to passion, lust, and the bondage of evils. This condition is denominated generation, and is supposed to be a kind of death to the higher form of life. Evil is inherent in this condition. The soul dwells in the body as in a prison or a grave. In this state, and previous to the discipline of education and the mystical initiation, the rational or intellectual element, which Paul denominates the spiritual, is asleep. The earth life is a dream rather than a reality. Yet it has longings for a higher and nobler form of life, and its affinities are on high. All men yearn after God, says Homer. The object of Plato is to present to us the fact that there are in the soul certain ideas or principles, innate and connatural, which are not derived from without, but are anterior to all experience, and are developed and brought to view, but not produced by experience. These ideas are the most vital of all truths, and the purpose of instruction and discipline is to make the individual conscious of them and willing to be led and inspired by them. The soul is purified or separated from evils by knowledge, truth, expiations, sufferings, and prayers. Our life is a discipline and preparation for another state of being, and resemblance to God is the highest motive of action.
Thanks, Scott. Any thoughts or questions about this passage? So much here. In the detail on the right, note the infant held by the angel of the presence, being transferred upward to the nous. Quote, regenerated, newborn, restored to a renovated existence of life, light, and purity, and placed under the divine protection. It's amazing work by Geoffroy Beauchard. You know, we normally think of him strictly in terms of the his illustration of the signs of the zodiac, but he did other extraordinary works. Okay, let's continue. Can we get a reader, please?
Lynn, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. In contrast to the idea of Hades as a state of darkness below, the gods were said to inhabit the tops of mountains, a well-known example being Mount Olympus, where the 12 deities of the Greek pantheon were said to dwell together. In his initiatory wanderings, the neophyte therefore entered chambers of ever-increasing brilliancy to portray the ascent of the spirit from the lower worlds into the realms of bliss. As the climax to such wanderings, he entered a great vaulted room, in the center of which stood a brilliantly illumined statue of the goddess Ceres. Here, in the presence of the Hierophant, and surrounded by priests in magnificent robes, he was instructed in the highest of the secret mysteries of the Eleusis. At the conclusion of this ceremony, he was hailed as an epotis, which means one who has beheld or seen directly. For this reason, also initiation was termed autopsy. The epotis was then given certain sacred books, probably written in cipher, together with tablets of stone on which secret instructions were engraved.
Thanks, Lynn.
Francis?
Yeah.
Yes. Anne Veronica says epotis is a Greek word. It means to overview the work that has been done.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, it suggests a higher perspective, to overview the work. Mm-hmm. Right, well, that fits with the idea of the seer. If you take that to the higher level of work that's being overviewed, then yeah, it equates with the seer. Okay, so here are the 12 gods and goddesses of the Greek pantheon that's described here. You might remember that there were also 12 drotars in the Norse tradition representing the 12 constellations. There's so much that coincides and overlays between these mystery scrolls. Also, we have similar descriptions of the subterranean rooms from which the candidate is ushered. In the Udenic mysteries, the Norse mysteries, into the presence of a statue of Balder the Beautiful. And the quote, brilliantly illumined statue of the goddess Ceres in the Eleusinian Mysteries. So next up, can we get a reader, please?
Francis, I just wanted to ask one thing, or I think this, for this reason also, initiation was termed autopsy. I find that fascinating.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is. Any, do you have any insight into that? I mean, the fact that they come from the, I mean, the whole purpose of an autopsy is to create a deeper understanding, right? I mean, it's oriented completely towards, you know, exploration of the reason of someone's death in modern usage. But in fact, it reveals that which is hidden, you know, in both cases. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, when I first saw that, I was like, what? But it does make sense. Okay, a reader, please.
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Is this loud enough, Bill?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
In the obelisk in Freemasonry, John A. Weiss describes the officiating personages of the Eleusinian Mysteries as consisting of a male and a female hierophant who directed the initiations, a male and a female torchbearer, a male herald, and a male and female altar attendant. There were also numerous minor officials. He says that according to the Porphyry, the Hierophant represents Plato's Demiurgus, or creator of the world, the torchbearer, the sun, the altar man, the moon, the herald, Hermes, or Mercury, and the other officials, minor stars.
Okay, so the Plato's Demiurgus is like the 7-in-1 logos, right? Or the Dhyani Chohan, who is the creator. So any thoughts or questions about this compact little paragraph? Astrology did indeed play a major role in the mysteries. For example, the second day of the greater mysteries was called Helade Miste. And Veronica probably could correct me on that. Or to the sea, ye Miste, from the command which greeted all the initiates to go and purify themselves by washing in the sea. Thomas Taylor gives us his astrological interpretation of that day's event. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes, Karen G., can you read that for us, please?
Oh, I hadn't unmuted myself. I'm not going to be able to see the last sentence, though.
That's all right. I'll pick it up for you. Go ahead.
Okay. On that day, the crier was accustomed to admonish the Miste to betake themselves to the sea. Now, the meaning of this will be easily understood by considering that according to the arcana of the ancient theology, as may be learned from Proclus, the whole planetary system is under the dominion of Neptune. And this too is confirmed by Martianus Capella, who describes the several planets as so many streams. Hence, when the soul falls into the planet Saturn, which Capella compares to a river voluminous, sluggish, and cold, she then first merges herself into fluctuating matter through purer than that of sublunary nature, and of which water is an ancient and significant symbol. Besides, the sea is an emblem of purity, as is evident from the Orphic hymn to Ocean, in which the deity is called Theon Agnisma Megaston, or Megaston, yes, the greatest purifier of the gods, and Saturn, as we have already observed, is pure, illumined intellect. And what still more confirms this observation is that Pythagoras, as we are informed by Porphyry, is in his
life of that philosopher, symbolically called the sea a tear of Saturn. And this is also from Thomas Taylor's Eleusinian and Bacchic Mysteries. So any thoughts or questions about this? Not easy to understand Taylor sometimes, but if you take a moment, he will take you deeper than most of the writers that reflect on the Eleusinian Mysteries. Thoughts or questions? As described in this phrase, the Hierophant and his officials each assumed the persona of one of the planets. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Carrie, can you read that for us, please?
The principal official of the rites was the Hierophant. He was elected for life and bound by a vow of celibacy. According to most accounts, he never left the sacred precincts, but worthy persons could have appointed him in the sanctuary, could have appointments with him in the sanctuary. The Hierophant was the narrator of the rituals. He explained the meanings of the symbols and ceremonies and sanctified those who attained the highest grade. While performing his ritualistic responsibilities, he impersonated the god Jupiter and was mystically identified with this deity. The Hierophant was assisted by 3 officials, the torchbearer, the herald, and the servant of the altar. In the astronomical theology, the sun was the torchbearer, Mercury, Hermes, was the mystic herald, and the moon the keeper of the altar.
Thanks, Carrie. In addition, there were many popular themes involving gods and goddesses who personified the energy of the planets, like the marriage of Mars and Venus, as depicted here. So, take a look at. Yeah.
Anne Veronica has a comment, and I'm going to ask you to say it, please, Anne Veronica.
Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Let me see what I have written. Autopsia is 2 words. It's 2 words in Greek. It means auto, which for us it means I personally am on the site, on the field, and opsia that has to do with seeing. So I personally see on site. That's why we say when there is a crime, we do an autopsy. We go to the site to see exactly what happens.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. I think that's that really does shed further light into the idea here of autopsy's connection with epoptis. How do you? What's the pronunciation again of epoptis?
Epoptis.
Epoptis. Okay, good. We're too far off. Thank you for that. Okay. So yeah. So this is an illustration that occurs in the middle of page 30 of the big book. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes, Anne Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
Ceres or Demetra was the daughter of Kronos and Rhea, and by Zeus, the mother of Persephone. Some believe her to be the goddess of the earth, but more correctly, she is the deity protecting agriculture in general and corn in particular. The poppy is sacred to Ceres, and she is often shown carrying or ornamented by a garland of these flowers. In the mysteries, Ceres represented riding in a chariot drawn by winged serpents.
Always serpents representing wisdom. So this would be, the wisdom of this aspect, which is the intuitional ability.
In Greek, Ceres for us is the goddess Demetra. And the cereal is called Dimitriaka from that.
Oh, is that right?
And all these wheats and these come by her name. They're called Dimitriaka.
Interesting. Well, it also occurs to me that wheat was one of the gifts from Venus, if I remember correctly. And so I bet you anything that behind that, this exoteric understanding of her being goddess of the harvest is some connection with the Venusian principle or feminine principle. Okay, any thoughts about this? All right. Next up. Reader, please.
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Women and children were admitted to the Eleusinian Mysteries, and at one time there were literally thousands of initiates. Because this vast host was not prepared for the highest spiritual and mystical doctrines, a division necessarily took place within the society itself. The higher teachings were given to only a limited number of initiates who, because of superior mentality, showed a comprehensive grasp of their underlying philosophical concepts. Socrates refused to be initiated into the Eleusinian Mysteries for knowing its principles without being a member of the order. He realized that membership would seal his tongue. That the mysteries of Eleusis were based upon great and eternal truths is attested by the veneration in which they were held by the great minds of the ancient world. M. Uvarov asks, would Pindar, Plato, Cicero, Epictetus have spoken of them with such admiration if the Hierophant had satisfied himself with loudly proclaiming his own opinions or those of his order?
Thank you. So MPH here describes a comprehensive system that embraced everyone from children to advanced initiates. We've studied no other mystery school with such a scope of inclusiveness. Its inclusion of women, a long-standing tradition in ancient Greece, is particularly notable compared to other mystery schools. MPH elaborates on this in his The Initiates of Greece and Rome. Could we get a reader, please?
Tia, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. It is interesting to note that in the Pythagorean school, women were accepted on the same basis as men and could advance to the highest grades of instruction. This may seem to be a unique circumstance, but actually the education of women was a major consideration among the Grecian states. After the death of Pythagoras, his wife became the head of his school and later married the most advanced member of the Pythagorean community. The identification of Eleusinian initiates presents an even greater difficulty. Every free person of good character was entitled to receive the lesser mysteries. As none but the initiated could participate in the secret rites, it was necessary that both men and women be accepted and bound by the same obligations. In the course of the ceremonies, the 12 Olympian deities were personified by members of the sacred orders, the gods by men and the goddesses by women. The Eleusinian sanctuary was sustained by the state, and the altars were attended by priests and priestesses, serving the deity to be propitiated.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this? Let's read about some of the contemporaneous philosophers and writers, the quote, great minds of the ancient world, and about what they thought about the mysteries. Could we get a reader here, please?
Olivia, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, and before we went to that slide, there was something, Francis, and the other one, it said women and children.
Yes, indeed.
Were admitted to the Eleusinian Mysteries.
Yeah, I think the slide is ahead of us, but at one point, the MPH states that 20 to 30,000 people were involved in these mysteries, the lesser mysteries now always, at any given time. So, that's a huge percentage of, the people living in the area. We'll be getting to that. But so there was obviously a stratified instruction, and children were probably introduced to, you know, the basic exoteric myths, the stories, you know, that Greek mythology is just full of, in order to prepare them, you know, for their esoteric meaning that would come later. And yeah, I don't think this at all suggests that, you know, the children were, except in extremely rare instances, were admitted into the higher teachings, but everyone was included. And, you know, we don't find that anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, if you would, please.
Sure. Clement of Alexandria says that what was taught in the great mysteries concerned the universe and was the completion and perfection of all instruction, wherein things were seen as they were, and nature and her works were made known. Plato said the object of the mysteries was to reestablish the soul in its primitive purity and in that state of perfection which it had lost. Epictetus said, whatever is met with therein has been instituted by our masters for the instruction of man and the correlation and the correction of morals. Proclus held that the initiation elevated the soul from a material, sensual, and purely human life to a communion and celestial intercourse with the gods, and that a variety of things, forms, and species were shown initiates representing the first generation of the gods. Purity of morals and elevation of soul were required of the initiates. Candidates were required to be of spotless reputation and irreproachable virtue. Nero, after murdering his mother, did not dare to be present at the celebration of the mysteries. And Antony presented himself to be initiated as the most infallible mode of proving his innocence at the death of Avidius Cassius. The initiates were regarded as the only fortunate men. It is upon us alone, says Aristophanes, shineth the beneficent day star. We alone receive pleasure from the influence of his rays. We who are initiated and who practice toward citizen and stranger every possible act of justice and piety. And it is therefore not surprising that in time, initiation came to be considered as necessary as baptism afterward was to the Christians, and that not to have been admitted to the mysteries was held a dishonor. It seems to me, says the great orator, philosopher, and moralist Cicero, that Athens, among many excellent inventions, divine and very useful to the human family, has produced none comparable to the mysteries, which for a wild and ferocious life have substituted humanity and urbanity of manners. It is with good reason that they use the term initiation, for it is through them that we, in reality, have learned the first principles of life. And they not only teach us to live in a manner more consoling and agreeable, but they soften the pains of death by the hope of a better life hereafter.
Thank you, Olivia. So you can see the extraordinary scope of contact that the mysteries had with the society, with the Greek society. This was by far the greatest inclusion. And, you know, I was especially struck by it came to be considered as necessary as baptism afterwards was to the Christians. Well, if you take that literally, every Christian at some point is baptized. And so anyone involved with the mystery school would receive some level of initiation. Now, you have to remember, there's the lesser mysteries, which really align one with all the proper understanding of right living, right expression. And then there's the greater mysteries, which are what we normally associate with true mysteries or the mystery schools, right? So it's a phenomenal. And what's astonishing, really astonishing, is somebody figured that there had to be at least 100,000 initiates of the mystery schools, and yet none come down to us. None of a few little tiny segments have passed down to us. But if the nature of these mysteries were never revealed, because to do so was punishable by death. And so it's really an extraordinary system. And it existed for 1,800 years, almost as long as the church. Okay, we turn to page 31, illustrated here during the next paragraph, for those who like to stay in touch with the big picture. Yeah.
Okay, Francis, sorry. Scott's got his hand up, but then also Anne Veronica said Eleusis means the coming one. And then to the question who was coming, it was Demetra, or as I heard, Triptolemos, I think, the one who taught agriculture.
Yeah, okay. Right. See, again, you have an exoteric and esoteric understanding. You could just imagine how important agriculture was to everyone at that time. It was really, that and animal produce was their entire. It provided all that was necessary. In order to survive. And so it was much more important than, we now think of, for instance, the grain, the world of grain. But in every instance, it also had the higher relations, the true abundance of soul. Yeah, thanks for that. Any other thoughts about this? Yeah.
Yes. Somebody, okay, anyway. Yvonne asks Pythagoras, was that Master KH?
Can somebody say that, address that? That's my memory, but I don't want to say absolutely that.
Okay.
Lindsay says it was.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I think initiation human and solar is where it's indicated.
So Kudhumi, KH, has the ashram that is directly in line with the Christ. So that would be, a second ray assignation. And also Pythagoras was in the line of Orpheus, that is, and as the teachings came to Greece, from Egypt, through Orpheus to Pythagoras, right? So it's part of that line. Go ahead.
Scott, you're up.
There were different mystery schools, obviously, around the known world at that time. And these great initiates would go to specific ones to learn particular things. Like to Egypt, you learned astrology and magic. There was something else when you went to Mesopotamia or India or elsewhere. What we don't have with the Eleusinian or those mystery schools, or any of them for that matter, is a comparison in any way to the theosophical degrees, 5 degrees we know about for initiation. I wonder how they interrelate and where they stand.
Yeah, would it be Great to know. Well, J.R.S. Mead wrote a book on Orpheus called Orpheus, where he calls it the Theosophy of the Greeks. So you might want to jump on that one. He might reveal something of that. My guess is that they were indeed that always, we're talking always about the early initiations, you know. I don't think there was ever an institution, even the greater mysteries, where you could take the higher initiations. But at least not in as late as the Greeks, maybe in earlier times, possibly in early Egypt, that it was possible to take the third literally in some temple there, overseen by godmen. But I think by the time the Eleusis school came into power, that the greater mysteries may have presided over the first and second, possibly. DK talks about the restoration of the first initiation, during the Aquarian age. So, we might hypothesize that was available in these ancient mystery schools. Who knows? Yeah, any writer would be speculating, because there's no one revealed their sources. So unless you got somebody like DK who is that kind of highest source, the information wouldn't be accurate anyway. Right. Okay, anything else? All right, so 31, page 31. It's the end of this segment. So could we get a reader for this next paragraph?
Lynn, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. The garments in which candidates were initiated were preserved for many years and were believed to possess almost sacred properties. Just as the soul can have no covering save wisdom and virtue, so the candidates, being as yet without true knowledge, were presented to the mysteries unclothed, being first given the skin of an animal and later a consecrated robe to symbolize the philosophical teachings received by the initiate. During the course of initiation, the candidate passed through two gates. The first led downward into the lower worlds and symbolized his birth into ignorance. The second led upward into a room brilliantly lighted by unseen lamps, in which was the statue of Ceres, and which symbolized the upper world, or the abode of light and truth. Strabo states that the great temple of Eleusis would hold between 20 and 30,000 people. The caves dedicated by Zarathustra also had these two doors, symbolizing the avenues of birth and death.
Thank you, Lynn. Any thoughts or questions about this? Again, MPH comments on the garments received and worn in The Initiates of Greece and Rome. It's a short passage here. BL, you want to read that?
Okay. The same author notes that those who were initiated continue to wear the garments they had worn at the blessed ceremony, as long as even fragments of the cloth were held together. And when the shreds alone remained, they were dedicated in some temple as a memorial to the mysteries of Demeter.
Thank you. All of this, gives us little fascinating glimpses into the impact of this mystery school and at this time. The concept of the two avenues, the wide road leading to hell and the ascending straight and narrow path, was a concept happily adopted by Christians centuries after the establishment of the mystery school at Eleusis. Could we get a reader for this? Avernus means avenue.
Martha G., can you read that for us, please?
Is it not obvious that by Avernus and the dark gates of Pluto, we must understand a corporeal or external nature, the descent into which is indeed at all times obvious and easy. But to recall our steps and ascend into the upper regions, or in other words, to separate the soul from the body by the purifying discipline, is indeed a mighty work and a laborious task. For a few only, the favorites of heaven, that is, born with the true philosophic genius, and whom ardent virtue has elevated to a disposition and capacity for divine contemplation, have been enabled to accomplish the arduous design. So in philosophic genius, that is a disposition to investigate for the purpose of eliciting truth and reducing it to practice. From the Eleusinian.
Thank you, Martha. Yeah, here we have Thomas Taylor again, right? Rarely does an artist capture the struggle to free oneself from the hold of the material realm as successfully as Michelangelo does in his series called The Awakening Slave. So also shown here.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this was, the true purpose behind this. In esoteric astrology, DK gives us a further teaching on the two gates described here. You could say, in a sense, the ultimate esoteric teaching. And we get a reader.
I'll read that too. The polar opposites to Capricorn is Cancer, and as you have been taught, these two signs are the two great gates of the zodiac. One opening the door into incarnation, into mass life, and into human experience, whilst the other opens the door into the life of the spirit, into the life of the kingdom of God, the life and purpose of the hierarchy of our planet. Cancer admits the soul into the world center, which we call humanity. Capricorn admits the soul into the conscious participation in the life of that world center, which we call the hierarchy.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Okay, finally, we can really only marvel at an ancient temple that could hold 20 to 30,000 souls. In 400 BC, this was about 10% of the entire population of Attica, shown up in yellow on the map there to the right, which included both Eleusis and Athens. So again, you can see how dominant this mystery school was, throughout this area of Greece at least. There are other mystery schools, in other parts of Greece at different times, but these two huge especially Athens as a population center, was dominated by this mystery school. I think Scott and I were having a conversation the other day and decided that there's no way that the actual literal temple could hold 30,000. I mean, even today, it takes a football stadium to hold that many, or even a concert venue is not going to be that big. So probably what was meant is the entire sacred grounds, the Eleusinian mystery school in its totality, shown here, Okay, next up. Can we get a reader, please?
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
Certainly. The following paragraph from Papyri gives a fairly adequate conception of the Eleusinian symbolism. God being a luminous principle residing in the midst of the most subtle fire remains forever invisible to the eyes of those who do not elevate themselves above material life. On this account, the sight of transparent bodies, such as crystal, Parian marble, and even ivory, recalls the idea of divine light. As the sight of gold excites an idea of its purity, for gold cannot be sullied. Some have thought by a black stone was signified the invisibility of the divine essence. To express supreme reason, the divinity was represented by under the human form and beautiful, for God is a source of beauty. Of different ages and in various attitudes, sitting or upright, of one or other, the other sex, as a virgin or a young man, a husband or a bride, that all the shades and gradations might be marked.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions? Porphyry here considers those artistic materials that best convey the idea of the, quote, luminous principle of God. Of these materials, Parian marble was the most frequently used for fine statuary in ancient Greece. Wikipedia tells us Parian marble is a fine-grained, semi-translucent, pure white, and entirely flawless marble quarried during the classical era on the Greek island of Paros in the Aegean Sea. Among the most famous pieces sculpted from Parian marble are the Venus de Milo and the winged victory of Samothrace. Well, we're going to pull the plug right there, so it's a good image to end on. Could we have dates for the next 2 webinars, please?
Yes. The Secret Doctrine webinar is coming up on the 21st of February, and the next Secret Teaching of All Ages will be the 7th of March. We're still at the 8 p.m. time, but the ones following both of those will be changing when we change to daylight savings time. So,
okay, good. All right. Well, as I always feel that it's such a privilege to host this series. I appreciate all of you staying with us and the interest that you're showing. Next time we're just at the tail end of the Eleusinian Mysteries here. Next time we'll be moving into the Orphic Mysteries, which are, to my mind, just as fascinating. So until then, we'll see you on the 21st for the Secret Doctrine and the 7th of next month for the Secret Teachings. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.